Welcome to the Retail Insider interview series. I'm your host, Craig Patterson, and we're joined here with Larry Leung. He's the principal of Transformity and is a customer experience strategist and an expert in all kinds of different areas. We're going to be talking a bit about airport retail today. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you for having me, Craig.
Now let's talk a little bit about airport retail here. We could do a bit of a focus on luxury retail. What are you seeing here in terms of retail in airports right now, before and after gates?
Well, it's been very interesting. So GTA just reported their 2022 financial numbers, and so I have them in front of me. They made $1.4 billion in revenue, and interestingly, only 150 million or so came from concessions. And so that's not a really big number. They get a lot more from landing fees, for example, or maybe even parking fees, and even the airport improvement fees that you and I are paying per every ticket. But it hasn't been as robust as it used to be for the airport due to the pandemic, less people traveling. But there has been some improvement. So now we're seeing about $23 to $28 on average per passenger coming through, and there were 35, almost 36 million passengers going through the Pearson Airport last year. So those are pretty good numbers. Can they get better? Definitely, because Pearson has seen almost 50 million passengers back before the pandemic. So we're still a little ways to go when it comes to recovery.
Are we seeing other airports, perhaps with higher numbers, or seeing more retail spending and a percentage of retail being the overall mix of revenue for the airports?
So North America has never been as robust when it comes to having a bigger retail mix as a component of financial. So if you think about non-aeronautical revenue, which is the total part of revenue that airports would receive beyond flights, they have always been at best 20, maybe 30% of all total revenue for an airport. Compare that to Asian airports, which is up to 50 plus percent. Say Dubai airport's 52%, Shanghai is 40%, where their revenues mostly is not about flying activities. And you have seen some of the best airports in the world, say, Singapore Changi Airport just won Skytrax #1 again, while they spent a lot of their capital in providing a robust customer experience, a passenger experience through, say, rainforest, through 24-hour shopping and having eateries that make sense for a lot of people.
Is a lot of the retail that we're seeing at airports luxury retail? I've seen that in quite a few airports around the world. Um, Obviously, there's not just luxury retail, there's all kinds of others. But what are you seeing in terms of sort of that retail mix? What's driving all that revenue for these really productive airports that are productive for the retail part?
Well, that's a really good question. If we do a tour of Canadian airports, what we're going to see is that the luxury retailers are mostly based in the international terminals or international section of any terminal rather than domestic or US. And the question would be, should there be more luxury retailers, or should Canadian retailers selling luxury brands, well, think about maybe having a little boutique within the terminal? Because let's face it, we have amazing Canadian shoppers and they are buying luxury. So they could be going to Montreal from Toronto for an opening, maybe a show, but they may still want to buy luxury, right? So what are we catering to those people going in Canada? I'd say maybe not from an airport's point of view.
Who's behind the retail mix? Like it's airport travel. There's a Bulgari store. I think still probably in Terminal 3 in Toronto. Hermes has a store in Vancouver. Um, who operates those? Is it the retailers themselves, or is it a third party?
Depending on which country you're in and depending on who is managing the airport, how the retail mix may be a little different. So say Pearson, for example, a lot of the spaces will be managed by a third-party vendor that will report up to Pearson's senior management. And usually contracts would be between 3 to 5 years and usually would be a little rent specific plus maybe a percentage of sales. So depending on the contract that a retailer would have, they would have an alcove maybe at the airport. And it would be very interesting that, such as Starbucks, for example, a lot of people expect to see Starbucks. How come I can't mobile order? It's the same thing. So it's a third party bringing in Starbucks, having them operate as a franchisee. So you and I wouldn't know that, in fact, they're not part of the Starbucks system. That's why we cannot use our app for the longest time. And it's the same thing with retail. So if you look at all the retail directory online, some of them may not even list out their terminal or airport terminal presence at all. So if you look into Toronto Pearson, for example, not all the major retail brands that are in Toronto at the Toronto airport are listed.
Now, they're not duty-free retailers. Like, is there any sort of a discount that a shopper would be getting versus going to a store on Bloor Street or Alberni Street, say in Toronto or Vancouver?
If you're not part of the duty-free offering, then I think the retailer would have a little more option available for sales based on their own corporate directives. And within duty-free, there would be more of an overall look into how to manage the customer mix and what should be discounted. But I seldom see a lot of discounts on retail brands. Maybe we see more of that with alcohol as a bundle rather than retail brands working as a bundle.
Now, duty-free retail, it doesn't seem to be quite as big here in Canada. We've obviously got duty-free retailers, but you go to places like, say, Australia, where they have obviously, duty-free retailers in the airport and even downtown. But let's talk about that a little bit. Are you seeing any missed opportunities here for duty-free retail in Canada generally?
A lot of people ask me this question: how come we don't have duty free on arrivals or maybe at the city? So we have seen it in many Asian countries. You mentioned Australia, where there is a downtown shop where people can buy. So this is part of the Canadian government directive for the time being, that they don't have a directive to allow for duty free on arrivals or at any city centers. Part of it is managing the clientele. Most of the alcohol selling is provincial and not federal, and so they may have a word to say if you suddenly sell duty free alcohol at a lower price than, say, your local liquor store. So that could be a problem in itself. And then other brands are just not engaged enough to ask, well, why not have duty free? But certainly, many airports operators have been asking, should we at least think about it? And maybe there are opportunities wasted, especially on the arrival side, where if you think about the Canadian airport designs, arrivals are typically not the place you want to be in, and they're usually boring and you just want to get out. But yet, airport arrivals is the first connection and touch point for many international travelers coming into the country. And so there are actually opportunities to showcase what the country and the city is about through duty free and other shopping opportunities.
Do you think we could talk about duty free first and then generally about the arrival retail. Do you think that we might see a change in duty free retail in Canada in terms of, say, having a large duty free store well, I mean, at an airport, which I guess we sort of do, but in a downtown core, like was in the case of Vancouver until maybe about a decade ago?
I hope so, because if you think about duty free, from many decades ago, many airports redesigned the layout of the terminal so that they can have duty free right after security and immigration. And as security and immigration process has become a lot more difficult for some people to navigate, and a lot of people have a lot more anxiety going through those process, then the urge of wanting to buy something right after security or immigration would be reduced. And I think with that particular mindset in place, a lot of people may just skip through duty free and just go to the gate or maybe go grab a coffee. And so many airports should be looking at all the trans traffic, looking at how people are looking at merchandise, what type of merchandise are people looking for when they're looking at duty free, and then maybe we think about how they should redesign duty free as part of the overall passenger experience. Because if you look at the numbers, almost 2/3 of the people going through Pearson are transfer passengers. If you're transfer passengers going to, say, international, well, then they would have already passed through duty free when they get through. So maybe they wouldn't even hit duty free coming into the terminal. And so we have to rethink, well, how do we motivate those passengers into spending more time looking at what's offered rather than sitting at the gate, which is not what the airport wants anyways.
And what about, I know for myself, I've started only doing carry-on luggage. Are there options out there for people that still want to shop but may not necessarily bring it in on their very limited luggage, which maybe packed to the gills like I do?
That is a really good question. So in Canada, no. Canada has not really evolved and innovated into thinking about shopping experiences beyond buy and carry, which is what we have been doing for many decades. But if you look at London Heathrow, for example, they have a robust shopping program whereby you can book in advance to get a shopper to help you get through security, and then you can buy many products. Some of them you can carry on board with you. Some you can get them to hold it so that when you come home, you can pick it up. Some can even deliver to your home address or to your destination. And so having extra availability for delivery or pickup allows a lot of shoppers to actually spend time and think, maybe I need to go to Burberry and buy something and look for something rather than going to a boutique because I didn't have time to. And then I can shop the way I want to and don't have to carry everything with me.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the I guess we could talk about the arrival part of the retail experience. Would it be quite challenging, I guess, as a first question, to reconfigure things spatially to accommodate some retail, which would sort of, I guess, facilitate this vision?
It would be, because if you think about, but the airport can think about retail in many ways. You have direct retailing, which would be at the terminal. They can also have a relationship whereby if you're passing through the terminal, that you can actually get a coupon for use in the city. So we have seen this in Singapore. So if you're flying Singapore Airlines previously, you can use your boarding pass and then you can go to many shops in the city and then be able to get discounts for products and services. So Toronto Pearson can do a similar program to cater and build those relationships with retail brands too.
Very interesting. I mean, how about shopping on planes? This is something that I think we saw years ago, just perhaps with alcohol and maybe cigarettes. But what about a full catalog experience or something, I guess, that would be a little bit more digital?
We have seen over the years that in fact there is reduction of duty free on board because their number one products are heavy, and if people are not buying them, then it's contributing to potentially more gas, meaning more expensive costs in running the flights. I think for airlines there is always going to be a place for duty free. I think it's more important to find products that are unique to the airline, to the destination, to the country that people want to buy. So if you have a limited edition teddy bear from, say, the Bay, for example, catered for any airline, Canadian airline, maybe those could be a good seller versus just something you can also get at your destination or at home. And alcohol and cigarettes are two things that many airlines used to rely on. And I don't know if those would be the motivator for many travelers today because number one, they're heavy. Number two, if you have a connecting flight, chances are the alcohol needs to be repacked into your suitcase, or that it may not get through security. And so, with that in mind, alcohol sales is not amazing when you have a transfer flight.
Are we seeing some airports around the world using retail as an actual attraction and draw? And I don't mean draw specifically just to fly, but something which is going to bring people in and say, for example, a luxury wing within almost like a Yorkdale type of situation within an airport. Are you seeing retail in itself becoming an attraction beyond just what we would have in an airport like Singapore with its cool other stuff that it has?
So many new airports coming in. The one thing they're gonna think about is people are not going to use a check-in counter to do all the check-ins, and so there would be space available outside of security to actually engage the customer. And we have seen many cities reclaiming that space and building restaurants and building smaller retail spaces for people to hang out before they get into the secured area. We have seen Edmonton do a very interesting job thinking about bringing customers off-site, having shopping available off-site, and then getting them to go to the airport. And it will be interesting to see how that is being evolved as a concept. Would they, for example, build a partnership for transportation, maybe even have more check-in areas directly at the shopping center? That way, then people don't have to worry about, oh, what's going to happen to my luggage? What's going to happen to the time I need to go to the airport now? That type of feeling. Well, if that is solved, then they would have more comfort in shopping, at the outlet mall. And so I'm definitely looking into Edmonton as an example of what's next and what else can happen outside of Edmonton.
What sort of improvements do you see that could be done to retail at airports in Canada, be it luxury or otherwise?
I think the number one thing really is to understand the customers. Where are they going? The more we know where they're going, the more we would be able to cater specific solutions for them, their retail mix. You know, we a lot of the brands that I've talked to, they think about every passenger as the same quality passenger, but we know that passengers are flying economy, premium economy, and business and first class. Well, what are their needs exactly from a retail shopping experience? Maybe some of them do want more catered shopping experiences that I can pre-book and that it turns into instead of a 1 hour time frame, maybe I can block time for a 3 hour experience at the airport so that you're not just shopping, maybe you can get food as you shop, get some champagne. That would be something that I think a lot of the luxury shoppers may want or premium customers may want rather than just staying inside a lounge. Now, if you're thinking about economy passengers, well, they may be eating at a fast food restaurant, or maybe they're going to Disney because they're a family. Well, then you have to ask yourself, if you're taking a family to Disney, what are things that we can help them to make sure that their trip is as comfortable and as fun as possible? And finally, premium economy passenger, that's the one segment that has been, in a lot of cases, um, not thought about. They're the ones who are paying 2.5 times more than a normal economy passenger, maybe not a business class. So they don't have access to lounge, but then they are traveling a little better. So what would be some of the elevated quality, higher quality experiences available for them? And I think that's sometimes not mapped out. And for a luxury retailer, well, you don't have just one type of customer, you have multiple types of customers. Then you have to ask yourself, how are you courting them? How are you telling them, number one, that you exist at the airport, and number two, what are some of the products available at different price range so that they would be managing that expectation and have that amazing shopping experience.
Interesting, interesting. One thing I find is going to the airport. We're going to airports more, earlier than ever, I think, basically. And I always feel a little bit stressed. I mean, you're going through security and whatnot. I don't want to miss my flight. I just have a general feeling of anxiety at the airport. Is there anything you could suggest that would get people maybe to relax more besides just plying people with alcohol?
Well, alcohol definitely works for a lot of people. I think part of it is to educate the passenger what's happening and what's happening at the airport much earlier. So typically, people buy their tickets anywhere from 3 to 6 months in advance of their travel, especially if they're flying for leisure over business. And so that means you have 3 to 6 months time to tell people what's happening, whether or not there may be some new environmental or cleanliness procedure that they have to think about. What about lineups that they have to think about? That's something that would reduce anxiety because I think a lot of people don't like waiting in lines. And if you tell them in advance that, hey, you know what, Craig, you should be there earlier because that your flight is at a very peak time, and that by going earlier or maybe even pay to book a appointment for security, which is available in other airports, then maybe that would reduce your anxiety. And more importantly, after you go through security and maybe immigration, what else is at the terminal so that your trip would be as amazing as possible? A lot of people may not know that there are manicure and pedicure services available at Pearson. Well, they may not know because usually people who book manicure and pedicure appointments, well, they booked an appointment, it's in their calendar, and yet at Pearson it's not something you can do. You just go and hope that there would be spaces available for you. So maybe in the future vendors should think about, well, maybe allowing people to book and give them some grace so that in case something happens, then they are not penalized.
Yeah, I think that's an issue generally, not knowing what's at the airport. I know for myself, I had to ask that question, is Bulgari, does it still have a store at Pearson Airport in Toronto? Because we don't see a lot of directories or advertising, but it makes sense for airports to really, I guess, educate people through some sort of even just marketing and advertising of what's there. Like we have a Ferragamo store at the Toronto airport. We've got a Gucci shop in Vancouver at the airport. Because they're not things you even see necessarily in a directory, at least not publicly. That's prominent and available.
So there are 2 points there. Number one, the digital directory needs to be more intelligent. So if you go to any of the Canadian airports, digital directory and type luxury, well, it may not show you all the stores available that sells you luxury goods. That's number one. And number two, really having the experience mapped out earlier. So if you're a luxury shopper, well, you may need a few things. Well, how can the airport help you plan the trip so that you know those stores, number one, exist, and then number two, the goods are available that you want to buy exist, and hopefully there will be something more limited edition, specifically catered to that city or the airport. As we have seen, Starbucks all over the world, the fact that you may have a mug with that one city, people love to collect those. So why not have that also in any number of shops in Toronto or in any Canadian airport?
It makes sense, and even just the wayfinding situation, I know that, I don't know why, and I guess it's the same thing maybe with the Path in Toronto and with Union Station and a few others, but I almost get lost. The wayfinding situation, even if they attempt signage, doesn't seem to be there. Do you have any suggestions for improving this, fiasco that people like me experience?
Well, certainly airports do not want you to get lost. So they're trying their best with their wayfinding. What we have seen is that technology is not the solution. Most people already have a backpack or maybe a carry-on. Plus, if they use their phone for wayfinding, it actually does not work. What I love is what you talked about, a luxury wing, for example. If there is a specific wing just for luxury retailers and that there are good signage for it, then I think it will make it easier to locate various stores. And more importantly, I think airlines can partner with those brands directly. And they know that you're going to, say, Vancouver Airport, and so they know where your gate is and what retailers are available near that gate area or near in that terminal. Why not tell you in advance? By telling you in advance, maybe you can make an appointment in the future, or maybe even hold um, goods and products so that you can just pick it up. You don't have to wait in line, just go and buy and pick it up. Make life easier for people. It's going to be something that we should see, and are some of the things I'm working with brands on, because I feel like, just like you said, the travel experience is not as seamless as the advertising is telling you, and they can do better.
And, speaking of doing better, do you have any, good examples of some airports, it can be globally, that have, amazing retail that you've seen?
Well, we talked about Singapore, Changi Airport. We talked about London Heathrow Airport. Paris and Amsterdam both have really good international airports that really showcase their character, their identity with their retail experience. And when they have specific stores that talks about who they are, then you really want to go. They do a really good job showcasing the airport using content creators. And the content creators are not just working for their channels, but working beyond their channels to showcase what's possible. And I think that's one area Canadian airports could use a little more help, using content creators to go outside of the airport social media, into telling people in Canada and outside of Canada what's possible. Because like you said, maybe you ask yourself, are certain brands still available? Are they even in the brands directory online? Maybe not, right? So I think more can be done to tell people what's going on.
Are we falling behind compared to, other countries or other places around the world in terms of our airport retail?
I think maybe it's a holistic strategy that the Canadian government, all the way down to tourism boards, should take on with the help of airlines and airports in really building out a shopping retail strategy. It's not, I don't think you can really solve the question of, are we falling behind, just putting the responsibility in one stakeholder. I think all the stakeholders can work together to come up with, well, who are these shoppers? Can we really showcase Toronto and any other Toronto Canadian cities that you're not just here to sightsee, but here to shop? And how and why? And why is the airport the place to shop? I think those are the questions that we need to work together to address together, and then build a strategy behind that.
You were recently quoted in an article in Retail Insider around bringing more local retailers, I think, into airports. Tell me a little bit more about, what you were thinking there.
Bringing local retailers not easy. I'm going to start that because it takes a long time to curate. It takes a long time to bring in some of the stores, and finally rent is really high. But many airports are suffering from the same same old. They look the same, they feel the same, they have the same retailers. And so for an airport to differentiate itself and really showcase who they are, they have to think local and maybe work with the local brands to develop them. So instead of just getting any local brands who's willing to pay rent, maybe have a innovation lab and develop locally how a brand can do better at the airport and beyond, because it's not just a retail experience. It's a Canadian experience going to have a store in a Canadian airport, right? So if I think beyond just retail and think it's a Canadiana exercise, then more can be done to educate, build awareness, maybe even systems. Because if you imagine that if smaller local stores don't use, may not have the purchasing power, may not have the same IT know-how into building a better experience, maybe that's something the airport can help them into, doing something more for them to make them a success story. And who doesn't like a success story, especially local success story? And that's what something I would want to, get into and buy if I have that opportunity to see local vendors in the airport.
Are you aware of any initiatives coming down the pipeline that might, say, improve retail at airports in Canada?
Well, I have seen, we just talked about local. I've seen more of that in Vancouver Airport and parts of Calgary. We have seen some of that, right? So I encourage more the Canadian airport authorities to really look locally, maybe even work with some of the local universities to come up with solutions. Because if money is an issue, well, then let's figure out something. Maybe work with the banks on that. If it's an idea issue, then let's work with universities in coming up ideas on how to build maybe a wing, that just like we talked about a luxury wing. Why not build a wing specifically with local artists and local vendors selling things? That could be a very interesting idea, because it would be very different across Canada. And more importantly, I want the different airports to work with each other. So if I'm going between Vancouver and Toronto, there are distinctiveness, uniqueness between the airports and the city themselves. Well, why not have them cross-promote each other? Why aren't all the Canadian airports cross-promoting between each other, so that it doesn't matter where I go, I'm gonna always feel a little bit of Canada at the airports. And I think that may be important. And it could be just as simple as seeing more Canadian flags, because I think in a lot of the airports, we don't always see the Canadian flag. Um, and that could be as simple as just showing, oh, that's a Canadian flag, so we know that store is local.
If airports were able to significantly increase their overall revenue from retail offerings, do you think there could be a bit of a reduction, say, and this is for the average person, for a reduction in the ticket price of some flights? Do you think there could be any savings passed on to consumers ultimately?
Well, many people don't realize that many Canadian airports have to pay rent to the government, and they also pay tax on top of that, right? So it's a lot of work for them, and that's why some of them have airport improvement fees. And if they are able to have a better retail mix that really go after the different clientele and showcase that what's possible and why you should shop at the airport, potentially with an increased sale, maybe they can reduce some of the airport improvement fees, because some of them gets to $38. I believe Winnipeg is charging $38 per passenger. And so you may have a Flair Airlines coming at $9 per flight. Well, that doesn't matter, because the airport improvement fee is already 4 times as high as the airfare. And so Canadians wouldn't necessarily see lower ticket prices if we don't see some of those fees go down.
Now, Larry, is there a way to increase dwell time to get consumers to spend more at the airport?
I think the goal for airports is to increase its increased dwell time. So we want you to get to the airport earlier, because there is so much to do at the airport, whether or not it's an experience-based item or a retail shopping solution. Airports want you to spend more money. The goal is to find ways to help you get there, to inspire you. So part of it would be education to the public. Part of it would be to showcase what's possible and redesign things like duty free, so that people are not going through duty free after they get to through security, for example, or immigration, when they're the most interest and have the highest stress. And then think about shopping maybe at the gate, rather than having all the retail at one location, maybe duty free. Why can't I buy and then just pick up at the gate. Those could be some things that people may want to do because Pearson, for example, already has an online solution. They have an e-commerce platform. So why can't I just buy from there and then tell you where my gate is, and then you just, you know, ship it to me, kind of like duty free.
I remember we had an article in Retail Insider a while ago that Pearson Airport had launched this e-commerce platform. As far as you're aware, Larry, has it been a success?
Why should people buy online at Pearson rather than Amazon? And you have to show customer what's happening. You have to show customers beyond your own social media on content platforms. They didn't really talk about it with, say, BlockTO or North City or you after you posted. We reached out because I wrote a piece and then I reached out to them, specifically call that out and say we would love to do a thing with you on your e-commerce, but they declined. So then the question is, well, why should people shop online and then get them shipped home? I don't know if I see that association. Not many airports do the same thing with an e-commerce platform like that. And if they do, it's more for the e-commerce component, it's more for tickets to sell for like experiences like Singapore Changi Airport. You buy tickets for many things. And so because they're so big, it's so big. I'm going there in November, and my flight lands at 11:30 p.m. and my next flight is not till 9 a.m. And so we are going to be at the airport, living at the airport overnight, and we'll be having fun because there will be retail, there will be food, there is a movie theater, there are lounges, there are a lot of different things. And I'm going to take pictures and videos for you to tell you if Toronto decides to be a 24-hour airport, or any of the Canadian airports want to be 24 hours, then what do they need to do? Um, Something we didn't talk about, but I feel like we should talk about in the future, employees. And there are thousands and thousands of employees working for airports, right? And most of the time by 9:30, there's nothing for them other than Tim Hortons. Well, that's a problem for them, right? Then they cannot even spend money. And so that adds to your sale. And then maybe further, I like the Edmonton idea. I just think their execution is not very good. But I like it because in, say, South Korea, a place we're gonna go in the future, they actually built airport city, or they airport cities where they have good transportation to bring you to different places. So people go and have plastic surgery at the airport city, and then they go back to the airport.
This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, Larry, for joining us today, talking about airport retail in Canada and globally.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been Larry Leung. He's the principal of Transformity. He's a customer experience strategist there, as well as an expert in all kinds of things around consumer behavior and airports and all kinds of other things. And I'm Craig Patterson. I'm the founder, CEO, and publisher of Retail Insider Media. I'm also the host here of the Retail Insider video interview series. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, whether or not you're doing this by video or on your local podcast channel. Thank you so much. Take care and bye for now.